He thought humiliating her would entertain the crowd, but in less than 10 minutes, that same crowd would witness the quiet collapse of his pride. The grand hall of the Whitmore Symphony Theater shimmered under golden chandeliers, every velvet seat filled, every eye fixed on Victor Langston, the world-renowned pianist whose name alone could sell out a 2,000-seat venue in under an hour. His tailored black suit sharp against the gleaming Steinway at center stage, his presence commanding, almost untouchable, and just beyond the glow of the spotlight, nearly invisible to everyone else, stood Clara Whitmore, a maintenance worker in a faded gray cardigan, her hands folded neatly, her posture calm, as if she belonged nowhere near the stage yet understood it better than anyone in the room. For years, she had moved quietly through these halls, polishing keys, adjusting benches, listening to rehearsals through half-closed doors, her existence blending into the background of greatness. Unnoticed, unacknowledged, and exactly how she intended it to be. Victor, however, was a different kind of presence, a man who thrived on admiration and fed on subtle displays of superiority. And tonight, as a minor technical delay stretched between performances, he scanned the room with a smirk that hinted at mischief, his gaze drifting past orchestra members, past assistants, until it landed on Clara, still as ever, standing near the wings. And in that moment, something in his expression shifted, not curiosity, but opportunity. "We seem to have a little time," he announced smoothly into the microphone, his voice echoing across marble and velvet, drawing polite laughter from the audience. "Perhaps we should have some fun." A ripple of anticipation spread, cameras subtly lifting, phones ready, and then he gestured toward Clara, casual, dismissive, as though pointing at a prop rather than a person. "You there," he called, his tone light but edged with condescension. "Why don't you come join us?" A murmur swept through the crowd, heads turning, some amused, others confused, and Clara paused for just a fraction of a second, her eyes lifting to meet the stage lights for the first time that night, not startled, not flustered, just aware, as if she had seen this moment coming long before anyone else had noticed her existence. And as the room leaned in, waiting to see what would unfold, Victor smiled wider, unaware that the simple invitation he had just extended was not the beginning of a joke, but the first step into a silence that would soon swallow the entire room. Clara did not move immediately, and that hesitation, barely a second long, was enough for the audience to assume what Victor had already decided about her, that she was out of place, unprepared, and completely unworthy of the spotlight now pointed in her direction. A few scattered chuckles slipped through the crowd, quiet at first, then growing as Victor tilted his head slightly, his smile tightening with impatience masked his charm. "Do not worry," he added, his voice smooth but unmistakably patronizing, "just something simple." The words echoed with a subtle emphasis that made the intention clear. This was not an invitation, it was a performance, and she was meant to be the punchline. But Clara's expression did not change. Her hands remained steady at her sides as she stepped forward, one quiet step onto the polished stage, then another. The soft sound of her shoes against the wooden floor almost lost beneath the murmur of the audience, yet somehow drawing more attention than any grand entrance could have. The spotlight found her fully now, illuminating the faint lines of age, the simplicity of her clothing, the absence of anything that suggested prestige or recognition. And still, there was something in the way she carried herself, something composed, almost deliberate, that did not quite match the narrative being projected onto her. Victor stepped aside with a theatrical gesture, offering her the bench with a half-bow that drew light laughter, feeding the moment, stretching it just enough to ensure the crowd was fully invested in what they believed would be an awkward spectacle. But as Clara approached the piano, her eyes briefly lifted, not toward the audience, not toward Victor, but toward the instrument itself, and for a fleeting moment, something shifted, so subtle it was almost imperceptible, like recognition, like memory. As though the distance between her and the polished black surface of the Steinway was not measured in feet, but in years. She reached the bench and paused, her fingers hovering just above the edge, not touching, not claiming, simply waiting, and the room, sensing something they could not yet understand, began to quiet, the laughter fading into a curious silence. Victor watched closely now, expecting hesitation, perhaps even retreat, but Clara lowered herself onto the bench with a calm that felt almost out of place in the tension he had carefully constructed. She adjusted the distance slightly, a small, practiced movement, precise without effort, and that was the first crack, so small that no one could name it, yet large enough to be felt, because people who did not belong on that stage did not move like that. They did not settle into the instrument as if returning to something familiar. They did not breathe the way Clara did in that moment, slow, steady, as if the noise of the room no longer existed. Victor's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before returning, sharper now, more watchful, and as Clara finally lifted her hands toward the keys, the last whisper in the room dissolved into complete silence, the kind that arrives not because it is requested, but because something unseen demands it. Her fingers did not strike the keys immediately, and in that suspended moment, the entire hall seemed to lean forward, caught between expectation and doubt, because this was the part where hesitation was supposed to happen, where nerves would take over, where the quiet woman would falter under the weight of 2,000 watching eyes. But Clara Whitmore did not falter. She inhaled slowly, almost inaudibly, and then, without announcement, without warning, her fingers descended, and the first note rang out, clear, precise, and impossibly controlled. It was not the uncertain touch of someone guessing. It was the deliberate voice of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The sound traveled through the hall like a thread, pulling every ear with it. And before anyone could process that single note, the next followed, and then another, forming a phrase so fluid, so intentional, that the air itself seemed to shift. Victor's expression changed almost instantly, the faint amusement in his eyes tightening into focus, because this was not simple, this was not clumsy, this was not what he had orchestrated. Clara's hands moved with quiet authority, not exaggerated, not showy, but deeply exact, each movement economical, every transition seamless, as though the piano was not an instrument she was using, but an extension of something she had long ago mastered. The audience, sensing the shift, began to still, the earlier laughter evaporating into something far more fragile. Attention, real attention, the kind that could not be faked, and then it happened. She did not continue with something easy. She did not play to meet expectations. Instead, she moved into a passage that only a trained ear would immediately recognize, a composition known for its complexity, one that even accomplished performers approached with caution, and yet Clara did not hesitate, her tempo steady, her dynamics controlled with an ease that made the difficulty invisible. Victor took a step closer, almost without realizing it, his eyes narrowing as he followed her hands, searching for a mistake, a misstep, something to confirm that this was still within his control. But there was nothing, not a single note out of place, and worse, there was interpretation, subtle, refined, a phrasing that suggested not just technical skill, but deep understanding, something that could not be improvised in a moment, something that came from years, decades perhaps, of lived experience with the music itself. A murmur moved through the front rows, quickly silenced as more people began to recognize what they were hearing. The tension in the room thickened, no longer built on anticipation of embarrassment, but on the realization that they were witnessing something entirely different, something that did not fit the story they had been invited to watch. Victor's jaw tightened, his posture stiffening as the control he had so carefully maintained over the evening began to slip, not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, undeniable fractures, because the quiet woman he had brought onto the stage as a joke was no longer part of his performance. She had taken the moment, reshaped it, and without raising her voice, without looking up, she had begun to change the entire room. The music did not slow, it deepened, expanding into something far beyond a simple demonstration, each note layering over the last with a precision that felt almost inevitable, as if the piece had been waiting for this exact moment to be played the way it was always meant to be heard. Clara's posture remained steady, her shoulders relaxed, her hands moving with a quiet confidence that erased every assumption the audience had made about her just minutes earlier. And then, without hesitation, she transitioned into a passage that changed everything. It was unmistakable now. The composition was one Victor Langston himself had famously avoided performing live, a piece critics had described as brilliant but unforgiving, one that demanded not only technical mastery but emotional control at the highest level. And yet Clara entered it seamlessly, not as a challenge, but as a continuation, her fingers moving faster now, yet never rushed, each note landing with clarity, every dynamic shift intentional, controlled, undeniable, and the realization spread through the hall like a ripple, first among the musicians in the front rows, then outward, a collective awareness forming that what they were witnessing was not an accident, not a fluke, but something far more unsettling, something real. Victor felt it before he understood it, the subtle tightening in his chest, the quiet fracture of certainty, because this was no longer his stage in the way he had always known it. He had built his reputation on control, on dominance, on being the one who dictated the experience. But now he stood just off-center, watching as that control slipped away note by note. His eyes locked on Clara's hands, searching, calculating, trying to find the moment where this would collapse, where the illusion would break. But it never came. Instead, the performance grew stronger, more assured, the complexity no longer hidden but embraced. And there was something else now, something that unsettled him more than the technique itself. Interpretation. She was not just playing the piece, she was reshaping it, subtle variations in phrasing, a timing that suggested not imitation but ownership, as though she understood the music in a way that went beyond what had been written. And the audience felt it. Even those who could not name it. They leaned forward, their expressions shifting from curiosity to astonishment, the earlier laughter now replaced with a silence so complete it felt almost fragile. No phones raised, no whispers, just attention, pure and undivided. And Victor, for the first time that evening, did not look like the center of anything. He looked like a man standing beside something he could not control, his confidence, once effortless, now rigid, forced. Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The quiet woman he had called onto the stage as a joke was not revealing a hidden talent. She was revealing a level of mastery that threatened everything he had built his image upon. And as Clara's hands moved into the most demanding sequence of the piece, a passage that required absolute precision at speed, the kind that separated performers from legends, Victor stopped breathing for just a moment, because deep down, he already knew what was coming, and he was not prepared for it. The sequence arrived like a storm without warning, rapid, relentless, and unforgiving. A passage so intricate that even seasoned performers approached it with visible tension. Yet Clara did not tense. She did not hesitate. Her hands moved with absolute clarity, each note landing exactly where it belonged, not rushed, not forced, but inevitable, as though time itself had aligned to her rhythm. The sound filled the hall with a power that was no longer subtle, no longer restrained. It demanded attention, it commanded it, and the audience, now completely silent, could only follow as the music surged forward, every eye fixed on her, every breath held. Because this was no longer a performance they were watching, it was something they were being pulled into, something they could not step away from. And Victor Langston felt it more than anyone, the realization settling in with a quiet, undeniable weight. This was not a mistake, this was not luck, this was mastery, and not just mastery, but something beyond what he himself had claimed as his domain. His gaze sharpened, his mind racing through possibilities, through names, through faces, trying to place her, trying to understand how someone like her could exist outside the world he knew so well. Because people who played like this were known, they were celebrated, they were documented, they did not disappear into the background of a theater, and yet here she was, sitting at his piano, on his stage, dismantling every assumption he had made with nothing more than sound. The final measures of the passage approached, the most demanding section, the one that required not just speed but absolute control under pressure. And Clara did not slow, she leaned into it, her fingers accelerating with precision, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if the complexity meant nothing, as if it had always belonged to her. And then, in a moment so exact it felt almost suspended in time, she resolved the passage perfectly, the final notes ringing out with a clarity that left no room for doubt, no space for interpretation, just truth. And in the instant that followed, the room did not react. It could not, because the silence that fell was too complete, too heavy to break immediately. It pressed against every surface, every person. A silence born not from confusion, but from recognition. Victor stood motionless, his expression no longer composed, no longer controlled, but still, completely still, as if any movement might confirm what he was not yet ready to accept. And for the first time in his career, he was not the one holding the room. He was standing inside a moment that did not belong to him, watching as it unfolded without his permission, without his influence, and as Clara's hands hovered just above the keys, not yet finished, not yet done. One truth had already settled into the space between them. She had not just met the challenge he had given her, she had erased it. And then, just when the audience thought the piece had reached its peak, Clara did something no one expected. She did not release the moment, she extended it, her hands lowering again with quiet certainty as she transitioned into a final interpretation that no sheet music had ever written, a variation so subtle at first that only the most trained ears caught it. But within seconds it unfolded into something unmistakably her own, her phrasing bending the familiar structure into something deeper, more human, more alive. And that was when the last illusion shattered, because this was no longer about technical brilliance. This was artistry at a level that could not be taught, could not be replicated, it could only be lived, and Victor Langston knew it. He felt it in the way his breath no longer aligned with the rhythm, in the way his thoughts stopped searching for flaws and instead froze in recognition. Because what stood before him was not someone stepping into his world, it was someone who had long ago outgrown it. The audience felt it too, a collective shift that moved beyond admiration into something quieter, something heavier, respect, the kind that arrives unannounced and leaves no room for denial. Clara's hands slowed gradually, not losing control, not fading, but guiding the music toward its natural conclusion, each note placed with intention, each pause carrying weight, until finally, with one last chord, she let the sound settle into the hall, not abruptly, but gently, like a truth being accepted rather than declared. And then she lifted her hands, not dramatically, not for effect, just enough to signal that it was over. And for a moment, nothing happened, no applause, no movement, just silence. The kind that fills a room when everyone understands they have witnessed something that cannot be easily explained. Victor stood there, still, his carefully constructed composure gone, replaced by something far more honest, uncertainty, not loud, not visible to everyone, but present, undeniable, because for the first time, he was not the measure of excellence in the room, he was standing beside it. And as Clara slowly rose from the bench, adjusting her cardigan as if she had simply finished a routine task, the distance between who she appeared to be and what she had just revealed became impossible to reconcile. She turned slightly, not toward the audience, not toward Victor, but toward the quiet edge of the stage where she had come from. And as she took her first step away, the question that hung in the air was no longer whether she belonged there, but how the world had ever overlooked her in the first place. The silence did not break all at once, it fractured slowly, like something too heavy to move in a single motion, a breath here, a shift there, until finally someone in the front row began to clap, hesitant at first, as if unsure whether it was appropriate, and then another joined, and another, until the sound built into something undeniable, not loud in excitement, but powerful in recognition, the kind of applause that did not celebrate entertainment, but acknowledged truth, and it rose, filling the hall, echoing off marble and velvet. Yet Clara did not turn back. She did not acknowledge it. She continued walking with the same quiet pace she had stepped onto the stage, as if the weight of what had just happened did not belong to her, but to everyone else who had finally seen it. Victor Langston, however, did not move. He stood rooted near the piano, his eyes fixed on her retreating figure, the applause surrounding him but not reaching him, because his world, the one built on certainty and control, had just shifted in a way he could not immediately recover from. And then, almost without realizing it, he spoke, not into the microphone, not to the audience, but to her, his voice quieter now, stripped of the performance that had defined it moments before. Wait. The word cut through the applause just enough, and for the first time, Clara paused, not dramatically, not as if she had been called back, but simply because she chose to stop. She turned slightly, her expression unchanged, calm, steady, and Victor took a step forward, his usual confidence replaced by something unfamiliar, something searching. "Who are you?" he asked, the question simple, but carrying a weight that reached far beyond curiosity, because he was not asking for a name. He was asking for an explanation, for something that could restore the balance he had lost. But Clara did not answer immediately. She looked at him for a moment, not with defiance, not with pride, but with a quiet understanding that made the question itself seem smaller than he intended. And when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, measured, but clear enough to carry. "Someone who stopped playing," she said, and that was all. No elaboration, no history, just a statement that left more questions than it resolved. Victor's expression tightened, the answer landing in a way he could not fully process, because it suggested something far more complex than a hidden talent. It hinted at a past, a story that existed long before this moment. And yet she offered nothing more, no explanation, no invitation to understand. And as she turned again to leave, the applause still rising behind her, Victor did not stop her this time. He could not, because for the first time, he understood that whatever she had just revealed was not something he could control, not something he could claim, and certainly not something he could reduce to a moment on his stage. And as Clara stepped into the shadows beyond the spotlight, disappearing back into the quiet space she had come from, the room remained filled with sound, but at its center, there was a silence that lingered, a realization settling into every corner, that what they had witnessed was not the rise of someone new, but the return of someone the world had somehow forgotten. The applause followed her into the hallway, muffled by the heavy doors but still present, like an echo that refused to let go of what had just happened. Yet Clara did not slow down, her steps steady, her expression unchanged, as if the storm she had just created belonged to another world entirely. Behind her, inside the grand hall, Victor Langston remained standing beside the piano, the weight of the moment settling in ways he could not ignore, the audience still watching him now, not with the same admiration as before, but with expectation, waiting for him to reclaim control, to say something that would restore the balance of the evening. But he did not speak, not immediately, because for the first time, words felt insufficient. Rehearsed lines and practiced charm had no place in what had just unfolded, and instead, he turned slowly back to the piano, his hand resting lightly on its polished surface, as if trying to reconnect with something that had just slipped beyond his reach, his mind replaying every note she had played, every decision she had made, searching not for flaws now, but for understanding, and the more he replayed it, the clearer it became. This was not imitation, this was not borrowed skill, this was ownership, and that realization settled deeper than anything else, because it meant that somewhere, at some point, Clara Whitmore had stood on a stage like this before, not as a spectator, not as a worker in the shadows, but as someone who belonged in the center of it. And yet she had stepped away, disappeared, chosen silence over recognition, and that choice unsettled him more than her performance ever could, because it challenged everything he believed about success, about visibility, about what it meant to matter. In the hallway, Clara reached the service corridor, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights replacing the distant roar of applause, and for a moment, she paused, her hand resting lightly against the cool wall, her eyes closing briefly, not in exhaustion, but in something closer to reflection, as if the past and present had briefly overlapped and were now settling back into place. Footsteps approached behind her, hesitant at first, then quicker, and a young stage assistant appeared, breath slightly uneven, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice catching slightly. "They are asking for you, the audience. They want you back on stage." But Clara opened her eyes and simply looked at him, not dismissive, not indifferent, just certain, and she shook her head once, gently. "No," she said softly, and there was no hesitation in it, no regret, just a quiet finality that left no room for persuasion. The assistant stood there for a moment, unsure how to respond, because he had never seen someone walk away from something like that, not when the entire room was calling them back. But Clara had already begun moving again, disappearing further down the corridor, back into the quiet spaces where she had always existed. And behind those doors, The applause continued, but now it carried a different meaning, not just admiration for what had been played, but a growing awareness of what had been revealed, and for Victor, standing alone under the fading spotlight, one truth remained impossible to ignore. The most powerful presence in the room had never needed the stage to prove it. The hall did not forget what happened that night. Even after the lights dimmed and the crowd slowly filtered out into the cool evening air, conversations lingered in hushed tones, not about Victor Langston's performance, but about the woman who had walked on stage without introduction and left without applause, a presence that had rewritten the memory of the entire evening in a matter of minutes. And in the days that followed, questions spread quietly at first, then with growing urgency. Staff members whispered her name in corridors. Musicians replayed the moment in their minds. Critics who had attended the concert found themselves unable to write about anything else, because what they had witnessed did not fit into any category they understood. It was not a debut, not a comeback, not even a surprise. It was something far more unsettling. It was a reminder that greatness does not disappear, it simply waits. And Victor Langston felt that truth more sharply than anyone, because for the first time in years, his name was not the center of the conversation. His performance, though flawless by every technical standard, felt distant, overshadowed by something that could not be measured in reviews or applause. He returned to the same stage the following evening, the same piano, the same audience expectations, but something had shifted, not in the room, but within him, his movements more deliberate, his confidence no longer effortless, because now there was a question that followed. Him, quiet but persistent, how had he failed to see what was standing right in front of him? And more importantly, what else had he overlooked in his certainty? As for Clara Whitmore, she returned to her routine the next morning. The same gray cardigan, the same quiet footsteps along the polished floors, wiping fingerprints from keys, adjusting benches. Her presence once again blending into the background of a world that still did not fully understand her. But something had changed, not in her, but in how the space around her responded, a subtle shift in the way people looked at her, a pause where there had once been dismissal, a recognition that did not need to be spoken, and yet she did not acknowledge it. She did not claim it. She simply continued, as if the moment on stage had been nothing more than a brief interruption in a life she had already chosen. And perhaps that was the part no one could fully grasp, not the performance, not the mastery, but the decision to walk away from it. Because in a world that measured worth through visibility and applause, Clara had revealed something far more rare, something far more difficult to understand. That true mastery does not demand attention. It does not seek validation. It simply exists, waiting for the moment when it is needed. And that night, in a hall filled with expectation and pride, it had stepped forward, not to prove anything, but to remind everyone watching what it truly looks like when talent is not shaped by ego, but by quiet, unwavering truth. And when the world finally sees it, even for a moment, it does not leave unchanged.